Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to be focusing on Chapter 7, all about prostitution, pornography, and sex trafficking. Here's a little bit of a chapter summary. The three perspectives used by sociologists in studying deviance as a social problem carry three primary assumptions. First, deviance is objectively given and understood. Second, deviance is socially constructed. And third, deviance is rooted in the social structure of society. Each of these approaches has been applied to prostitution, which has existed throughout recorded history and today is part of a global sex industry. Prostitutes are at risk for many health and safety problems. Functionalists believe a certain amount of deviance, including prostitution, contributes to the overall stability of society. Interactionists examine questions such as why people become prostitutes. Conflict theorists highlight the relationship between power in society and sex industry work. Sociologists have identified 5 tiers of prostitution, ranging from escort prostitutes to crack-addicted women who exchange sex for a hit of crack. Most prostitutes are women between the ages of 17 and 24, although older and younger women and some men are also prostitutes. Another aspect of the sex industry is pornography. Sociologists examine the issue of pornography from both a cognitive and moral form and framework. Cognitively, they ask, how real is the problem? And morally, they ask, what are the arguments as to why something is bad? Technology has made some forms of pornography very difficult to censor. After watching this video and reading Chapter 7, you should be able to identify 3 approaches to studying deviance and discuss how these approaches are related to the concept of sexual deviance. Define prostitution and explain why it's often referred to as, quote, the world's oldest profession. Describe how industrialization, normalization, and globalization have contributed to the growth of the sex industry and international sex trafficking. Discuss the health and safety aspects of prostitution. Describe the nature and extent of prostitution in the United States and explain how age, class, and race are closely linked to prostitution. Explain functionalist, symbolic interactionist, and conflict perspectives on prostitution and the sex industry. Discuss the social construction of pornography and describe how pornography has changed in nature and extent in the digital age. And finally, identify possible solutions to the problems associated with prostitution, pornography, and sex trafficking from functionalist conservative, conflict liberal, and symbolic interactionist approaches. So, sociologists, they use 3 primary approaches in studying deviance. The first approach assumes that deviance is objectively given. A deviant is any person who does not conform to established social norms, specifically folkways, mores, and laws. Folkways are informal norms or everyday customs that may be violated without serious consequences. Mores are strongly held norms with moral and ethical connotations. Laws are formal, standardized norms enacted by legislatures and enforced by formal sanctions such as fines and imprisonment. Within laws, we have civil law and criminal law. Civil law deals with disputes among people or groups, such as an argument between a landlord and tenant over the provisions of an apartment lease. Criminal law deals with public safety and well-being and defines the behaviors that constitute a crime. Under this approach, social problems such as prostitution and pornography are seen as significant departures from existing criminal laws in certain situations and violations of mores in others. Societies must employ social control mechanisms to limit deviance and criminal behaviors in society. Social control may either be internal or external. Internal social controls occur through the socialization process as people learn to adhere to the norms of social groups and the larger society. External mechanisms of control include the criminal justice system, enforces laws, whether or not individuals choose to adhere to them. This second approach assumes that deviance is socially constructed. A behavior, belief, or condition is deviant because it is labeled as such. Deviance is not a quality of the act of the person committing it. Rather, the deviant is one to whom the label of deviant has been successfully applied. The third approach assumes that deviance is rooted in the social structure of society, particularly in power relations. Deviance is defined initially and disproportionately by the most powerful members of the dominant class and racial and gender groups, whose power and privilege are protected at the expense of subordinate group members. In the US, definitions of what is sexually deviant has varied from time to time, place to place, and group to group. Traditionally, at least 4 types of sexual conduct has been regarded as deviant. 1 is premarital sex, 2 is extramarital sex, 3 is promiscuous sex, and 4 is underage sex. Prostitution crosses several lines of prohibited sexual conduct. So let's look at prostitution from a global perspective. Systems of prostitution refer to any industry in which women's or children's and men's bodies are bought, sold, or traded for sexual use and abuse, including prostitution, pornography, live sex shows, international sex tourism, and sexual slavery. The vast majority of prostitutes around the globe are women and children. A certain amount of male prostitutes do exist, although most boys and men in the sex industry engage in sexual encounters with other males. Prostitution has been referred to as, quote, the world's oldest profession because accounts of prostitution have existed throughout recorded history. Over the past 4,000 years, prostitution has neither been totally accepted nor completely condemned. In ancient Greece, prostitution was accepted, and upper-class prostitutes were often admired and became companions of powerful Greek citizens. However, the prostitutes were refused the status of wife. Such early Christian leaders like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas argued that prostitution was evil but encouraged tolerance towards it, asserting that it served a basic need. Later Christian leaders, such as Martin Luther in the 16th century Europe, believed that prostitution should be abolished on moral grounds. In the 19th century feminist movement, women, for the first time, had an opportunity to voice their divergent opinions about prostitution. Some advocated the eradication of prostitution due to the moral degeneracy of male promiscuity. Others urged that society should provide prostitution with legitimacy as an expression of female sexuality outside the marriage. Today, advocates suggest that prostitution should be viewed as a legitimate career choice for women, or prostitute as sex workers, but opponents argue that prostitution is rooted in global gender inequality. That is, prostitution is someone who's a victim of oppression. Over the past 5 decades, prostitution has been industrialized, that is, commercialized sex. It's also been normalized, that is, treated as merely a form of entertainment with no legal impediments to promoting it as a commodity. And it's been globalized, meaning that the sex industry has become global as people's lives have become increasingly linked on a global basis. Recent estimates suggest that as many as 1.8 million children, as young as 10 or 12, each year enter the commercial sex trade, the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. The global sex industry thrives because of sex trafficking, involving situations in which an adult is coerced, forced, or deceived into prostitution, or maintained in prostitution through coercion. These situations often include debt or financial debt bondage. The demand for prostitution is greatest when large numbers of men are congregated for extended periods of time in the military or on business far from home. The term sex tourism refers to travel by a person specifically to engage in sexual activity with prostitutes. The global sex industry reflects economic disparities between the poorest developing regions of the world, where women and children tend to be bought, sold, or traded like many other commodities, and the richest developed regions of the world, where many of the industry's consumers reside. Although research indicates that global sex industries, especially prostitution, contribute to the transmission of HIV, many agencies and governments are not willing or able to come to grips with this problem. This is an example of sex trafficking, where young women and girls are kept in this debt bondage, and you can see them being shuffled into a van. They will then go to where a number of men are congregating, and these consumers who are wealthier or have more assets than these women will use their bodies for pleasure. These women don't receive their pay. The person who oversees them, aka a pimp, is the one who will collect their money, and they will continue to be kept in this debt bondage. Prostitution should be classified as a hazardous occupation because of its negative physical and psychological industries. Prostitutes often suffer physical injuries similar to those suffered by women who are victims of domestic or interpersonal and interpartner violence. Prostitutes may also be brutalized or killed by individuals who may or may not actually use their services. Prostitutes and women specifically employed in the sex industry are vulnerable to numerous health risks, including sexually transmitted infections. They also have a high risk of chronic gynecological problems and unwanted pregnancy. Research shows that emotional health is another serious issue associated with prostitution. Problems include post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and substance abuse, including alcohol and drug use. So let's look at prostitution in the United States. In the U.S., organized prostitution networks have been identified in urban, suburban, and rural areas. Women and children from Asia and Mexico have been among the most frequently exploited by smugglers. A rapid transition has occurred from selling sex on the streets to procuring customers on the internet. When we look at the extent of prostitution, sociologists have identified 5 levels or tiers of prostitution. First, there's prostitution in age, class, and race. Top-tier prostitutes typically are referred to as escorts or call girls and call boys. Most don't think of themselves as prostitutes. They're considered to be top tier because they earn higher fees and have more selectivity regarding their working conditions. They typically have more years of formal education than other types of prostitutes, and many dress nicely so as to not call undue attention to themselves at luxury hotels, clubs, and apartment buildings. Escort prostitutes work, quote, on call, going out to see customers who are referred to them by their escort service, pimp, or other procurers, who receive a percentage of their fees. The internet has liberated many escorts from services, pimps, and other procurers by allowing direct connection between worker and client. Some encounter abusive customers, sexually transmitted infections, and sometimes violence or even death. The second tier of prostitutes is comprised of hustlers and some strippers and table dancers who engage in prostitution on the side. People in this tier primarily work out of nightclubs, bars, and strip joints. Hustlers are sometimes referred to as bar girls or bar boys because they are supposed to hustle customers to buy drinks. Most hustlers are not paid by the bar and earn their livelihood by negotiating for, quote, sexual favors with customers who often are lonely and want someone to talk to as well as someone to have sex with. The third tier is house girls who work in brothels or houses of prostitution run by a madam or pimp who collects up to half the fees earned by women. Customers choose, quote, dates after they arrive at the brothel or prior to that on internet websites where they make a selection before coming to the brothel. Since prostitution is illegal in most states, houses of prostitution typically operate as body painting studios, massage parlors, or as other businesses in the underground or the illegal economy. The only legal brothels in the United States are Nevada counties where prostitution within licensed brothels is legal. Text messaging and internet websites have drastically reduced the need for brothels and similar physical locations for making initial contact between prostitutes and customers. Near the bottom tier are streetwalkers who publicly solicit customers and charge by the, quote, trick. Most work in a specific location and defend it from competition by other prostitutes. Pimps are important for streetwalkers, furnishing status and some protection. However, the relationship is often exploitative and sometimes violent. The bottom rung of prostitution is occupied by women who are addicted to crack cocaine and engage in crack for sex exchanges. This problem affects many poor women, particularly Black and recent immigrants, who are at high risk for sexually transmitted diseases and unwanted pregnancy. Although fewer studies have examined the hierarchy in male prostitution, 4 main categories have been identified. The gigolo is a heterosexual male prostitute who often works at resorts, spas, or on cruise ships, where he can easily meet lonely, older women who may pay for companionship more than sex. Male escorts may be heterosexual or homosexual, and increasing numbers of these escorts advertise their services and find dates through online services. Hustlers are homosexual male prostitutes who are hired by other males for sexual favors. Most are ages 18 to 25. Young boys and teens below age 18 are referred to as, quote, chickens or, quote, chicken hawks. Many of these individuals have similar stories to those of young girls in prostitution. Many attempts have been made to estimate the number of prostitutes in the U.S., but these estimates are not based on strong scientific evidence. Child and adolescent prostitution is particularly difficult to quantify. The internet has rapidly changed prostitution from a, quote, alleyway business to an online service and has made estimations determining the nature and extent of prostitution in the U.S. and other nations much more difficult to ascertain. Some analysts believe that as many as 40 million prostitutes are at work worldwide. Each year, about 80,000 people are arrested for prostitution-related crimes in the U.S. Women are much more likely to be arrested for prostitution in any given year. Only about 10% of arrests for prostitution-related crimes of the sex patrons, who almost exclusively are men. Accurate estimates are difficult to make because of how prostitution is defined, because of the fact that much prostitution is not reported, and because of biased arrest records, as well as the drifting in and out of prostitution and on the part of the prostitutes. So let's look at prostitution and age, class, and race. Age and prostitution are closely linked. The vast majority of female prostitutes are young women between the ages of 17 and 24. Some are as young as 13 or 14. The peak earning age is about 22. Male prostitutes are also typically of similar age. The typical male customer is middle-aged between ages 35 and 44, white, and married. While a small percentage of teenagers enter prostitution through coercion, most are runaways who left home due to sexual abuse or other family problems. Others were thrown out of their homes by parents or other family members. Regardless of their prior history, many become prostitutes because prostitution is the best or only job they can get. Lower income and impoverished women and men are far more likely to become prostitutes than are the affluent. Some people with little formal education and few job skills view prostitution as an economic necessity. We should also note that race is also an important factor when it comes to prostitution. Sociologist Patricia Hill Collins suggested that Black women are affected by the widespread image of Black women as sexually promiscuous, potentially prostitutes. She traces the roots of the stereotype to the era of slavery, when Black women and Black men and children were at the mercy of white male slave owners and their sexual desires. In 2009, African Americans, who comprised of 12.6% of the U.S. population, accounted for 40.7% of all prostitution arrests. Now let's look at sociological perspectives on prostitution. Functionalists believe that the presence of a certain amount of deviance in society contributes to its overall stability. According to early sociologist Emil Durkheim, deviance clarifies social norms and helps societies maintain social control over other people's behavior. By punishing those who engage in deviant behavior, the society reaffirms its commitment to its sexual norms and creates loyalty in people as they bind together to oppose deviant behavior. According to sociologist Kingsley Davis in 1937, prostitution will always exist because it serves important functions in societies, such as the United States, that have restrictive norms governing sexual conduct. It provides people with quick, impersonal sexual gratification that does not require emotional attachment or a continuing relationship. Prostitution provides a sexual outlet for men who don't have an ongoing sexual relationship because they aren't married or have a heavy work schedule. It provides people an opportunity to engage in sexual practices such as multiple sex partners or sadomasochism that regular sex partners or spouses might view as immoral or distasteful. Prostitution protects the family as a social institution by making a distinction between, quote, bad girls or, quote, bad boys, with whom one engages in promiscuous sexual behavior, and, quote, good girls and, quote, good boys, with whom one establishes a family. Finally, according to Davis, prostitution benefits the economy by providing jobs for people who have limited formal education and job skills. According to the symbolic interactionist approach, we define any situation according to our own subjective reality and the roles we play in society. For some prostitutes, impersonal, quote, for hire sex is a business deal that can be efficient, non-emotional, and a great way to earn money while satisfying another person's needs. For the interaction to be positive for the prostitute, she must gain control over the situation. Some people become prostitutes to gain greater freedom and a wider range of career options than they might otherwise have. The subjective reality of many other prostitutes is that they are essentially objects of exploitation by others, and they have no choice but to remain in the business to survive. It's impossible to come to a consensus about what motivates men to pay for the services of prostitutes because numerous factors are involved in why men behave as they do. Conflict perspectives on prostitution highlight the relationship between power in society and sex work. From this approach, laws that make prostitution illegal are created by powerful dominant group members who seek to maintain control and cultural dominance by criminalizing sexual conduct they believe to be immoral or in bad taste. Conflict analysts use a liberal feminist framework belief that prostitution should be decriminalized. Laws making a crime should be repealed. These analysts argue that prostitution is a victimless crime involving willing participants in an economic exchange, and it should be treated as a labor issue. Organizers of anti-prostitution have argued that prostitution does harm girls and women. Conflict perspectives using Marxist feminist and radical feminist frameworks suggest that women become prostitutes due to structural factors such as economic inequality between women and men and patriarchy, which gives men control over women's bodies. According to this approach, women's bodies are viewed as commodities under capitalism and patriarchy. According to Marxist feminists, the only way to eliminate prostitution is to reduce disparities in income levels between men and women. According to radical feminists, prostitution will not be eliminated until patriarchy ends. Conflict theorists who focus on the interrelationship among race, class, and gender in examining social problems suggest that criminalizing prostitution uniquely affects poor women, and especially women of color, who are overrepresented among street prostitutes and targeted by law enforcement. So now we're going to switch to pornography. Social scientists have difficulty in determining what constitutes pornography and if it's an actual social problem. Public attitudes change over time regarding what materials should be tolerated and what materials should be banned because of their obscenity. In Miller versus California in 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court held that material can be considered legally obscene only if the work as a whole, 1, appeals to prurient interests or lustful ideas or desires, 2, depicts sexual conduct in an offensive way or a patently offensive way as defined by state or federal law, and 3, lacks serious literacy, artistic, political, or scientific value. To some analysts, the court's decision has contributed to the social construction of pornography as a social problem. There are 2 key elements that are involved in the social construction of pornography as a social problem. So we're going to look at it from a cognitive framework and a moral framework. The cognitive framework refers to claims about the reality or factualness of the situation comprising of, quote, the problem. As to pornography, the cognitive framework assumes that such material actually affects people's behaviors, actions, or attitudes. An opposing framework would be that pornography is a fantasy mechanism that allows people to express the forbidden without engaging in forbidden behavior. The moral framework refers to arguments as to whether something is bad, immoral, or unjust. In the case of pornography, moral condemnation arises from the belief that graphic representations of sexuality are degrading, violent, and sinful. The moral framework may distinguish between pornography and erotica, but this distinction appears to be highly subjective. Erotica are materials that depict consensual sexual acts that are sought by and pleasurable to all parties involved. As part of the multi-billion-dollar sex industry, pornography is profitable to many people. Technological innovations have increased the variety of pornographic materials available, as well as their methods of distribution. Many people have access in their homes and offices to sexually explicit materials such as pornographic websites, mail order merchandise, and movies on X-rated cable television channels. A drawback to this availability is that children have many more opportunities to view pornographic materials. The internet also allows child pornographers to take advantage of speed and anonymity to exploit vulnerable young people and spread horrifying images across the internet. It's estimated that the porn film industry alone is about a $10 to $20 billion per year enterprise. Typically, female workers earn about 50% more than men. According to some analysts, pornography is a prime example of the principle of supply and demand. As long as demand is high, pornographers will continue to market their goods and services. New developments in technology bring new demands for regulation or censorship. 2 presidential commissioners examined pornography but reached contradictory conclusions. Other studies produce incomplete results. In 1970, the U.S. Commission on Pornography and Obscenity found no conclusive links between pornography, sex crimes, or antisocial behavior. In 1986, the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography concluded that pornography is dangerous, causes sex crimes, increases aggression in males, inspires sexism against women, and encourages pedophilia, where adults engage in sexual intercourse with children. Researchers do not agree on the extent to which pornography that depicts excessive sex, violence, and domination of one person by another affects behavior. Most adult films feature explicit violence, including rape and female domination, and exploitation by men. The internet has made various types of pornography more readily available and has contributed to a massive increase in the availability, accessibility, and volume of child pornography. Pornography is linked to age, gender, class, and race. Due to the secretive nature of much usage, research is limited on who consumes pornography. The typical customer of an adult bookstore is a white, educated, married, middle-class man between the ages of 25 and 36. Younger and more educated adults express more accepting attitudes towards pornography than older, less educated adults. Overall, men watch more sexually explicit material and hold more favorable attitudes towards it than women do. Some analysts attribute this difference to gender role socialization. In a society where men are socialized to be sexual initiators and often fear rejection, pornography is satisfying to them because it typically shows a willing female partner. In contrast, women have been socialized to respond negatively to material showing nude bodies and male pleasure, sometimes at the expense of women's sense of safety, dignity, and respect. In recent years, more women have become consumers of softcore pornography and other materials. In general, women are more vocal than men in opposing pornography. According to film scholar Laura Kipnis in 1996, many sentiments against pornography are rooted in class-based elitism. Opposition to pornography is a form of maintaining class distinctions in society. From this perspective, rejection of pornography is the rejection of all that is vulgar, trashy, and lower class. Although not all pornography consumers are lower class, Kipnis believes that members of the upper class typically view pornography consumers as lower class people who may imitate the images they see before them. In another class analysis of pornography, philosopher Alan Sobel in 1986 linked men's use of pornography with their feelings of boredom and powerlessness resulting from capitalist work relations, the nature of labor, and the centralization of economics and politics. Men use pornography to construct fantasies and thus gain a sense of control. Sociologists Alice Mayle and Diana Russell in 1993 examined how different racial ethnic groups are portrayed in pornography. In a heterosexual pornography store, white women were featured in 92% of the pornography, perhaps because they fulfill traditional stereotypes equating female beauty with white skin and Caucasian-like features. People of color were more likely to be found in materials featuring rape, bondage, sadomasochism, anal sex, sex with children, and sex between women. Sociologist Patricia Hill Collins in 2005 suggests that racism in pornography can be traced to the oppression of Black women in slavery. And here we see the image of a pornographic site on the internet. So is there a solution to problems associated with prostitution, pornography, and the sex industry? Eliminating prostitution, pornography, and other components of the sex industry has received little attention in recent years and seldom raises a stir until the subjects involved are children or sex industry customers are found to be ministers, teachers, or professors. However, enough people view the sex industry as a threat to society and young people that certain acts remain subject to criminal prosecution. There are two major functionalist conservative theories regarding solutions to problems associated with the sex industry. Some functionalists have suggested that some segments of the sex industry serve an important function in society and should therefore be regulated and carefully controlled, particularly so that children are shielded from these activities and materials. From a religious conservative point of view, prostitution and pornography are threats to the moral values of society, particularly family values, because they encourage sexual intercourse outside of marriage and often engage in, quote, deviant sexual behavior. They assert that the sex industry should be censored or eliminated outright, although censorship is a very complicated issue in the global marketplace. Several conflict liberal solutions to problems associated with the sex industry have emerged. People who advocate a conflict or liberal point of view regard the sex industry emphasis between the relationship between power in society and sex work. These theorists assert the best way to solve the, quote, problem of prostitution and pornography is to decriminalize these activities. From this perspective, until other social problems such as poverty, racism, and sexism are reduced or solved, there will always be a sex industry because it serves as a vehicle to make money. Critics argue that there is no such thing as a victimless crime. Several feminist theories exist. Many feminist analysts are critical of certain kinds of pornography because it portrays sexist images of women, emphasizes male dominance and female submission, and encourages women to be valued by their ability to please men, and therefore should be done away with. Other feminists believe we should focus instead on eliminating structural factors that contribute to women's economic inequality and their oppression under patriarchy, rather than initially trying to eliminate the sex industry. Others primarily focus on pornography as a form of sexual discrimination and see this problem as a civil rights issue. Anti-censorship feminists assert that the cause of women's subordination cannot be narrowed down to a single factor, such as pornography. Therefore, pornography should not be censored because open discussions about sexuality and sexual practices promote women's sexual freedom and their right to express themselves. Because symbolic interaction is focused on the process of interaction, this perspective primarily might offer solutions to issues relating to prostitution and the sex industry based on people who are engaged in sex work or those who create, produce, and distribute pornography. According to most symbolic interactionists, people view sex work through the lens of their own mores and philosophical beliefs, and these are subject to change over time and over generations. Some analysts have pointed out that to gain a better understanding of why people participate in certain kinds of behaviors or hold specific beliefs, we must first understand where they are located within global hierarchies based on class, gender, or race ethnicity. To reduce problems associated with the sex industry, we need to find out more about how people perceive their actions and what social meanings they attach to these experiences in the sex industry. This approach keeps us from overlooking certain important issues that, quote, big picture approaches, such as functionalist and conflict theorists, or conservative and liberal political perspectives, what they might tend to ignore or miss altogether. I hope that this was helpful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out to me via email. Don't forget, in the description box below is an extra credit question. All you need to do is answer the question, take a screenshot, and upload it for extra credit. Remember, it's due by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Until next time, have a great one and take care.